Good. I'll go ahead and call this regularly scheduled meeting to order. If we can go ahead and please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call. Let's see here. Commissioner Khrushchev?
Here.
Commissioner Walker?
Here.
Vice Chair Dixon?
Here.
Chair Pahana?
Here.
All present?
Thank you. These proceedings may be viewed on demand at the City of 29 Palms website at www.29palms.org. You may also live stream this meeting by going onto the city website by clicking Meeting Agendas link. Public comment. This is a time for the public to address the Planning Commission on issues within the jurisdiction of the Commission that are not on this agenda. All comments are to be directed to the Chair of the Commission and shall not consist of any personal attacks. Members of the public are expected to maintain a professional and courteous decorum during their comments. There is a time limitation of 3 minutes, and if you haven't already done so, please fill out the name and address slips and hand them to the Planning Commission Secretary. The Planning Commission is prohibited by the Brown Act, state law, from taking action or discussing at length items not included on the printed agenda. Public comments on specific agenda items will be deferred until consideration of that item on the agenda. Any public comments? All right, moving on. Commission comments and reports of meetings attended. Mr. Khrushchev.
Yes, ma'am. I attended the city council meeting last Tuesday. It was both more interesting and frustrating at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Walker?
I don't have any meetings I've attended.
Thank you. Jason?
I have not attended any meetings as well.
Thank you. Just want to say Happy New Year to everybody. 2023, our first meeting together. Looking forward to seeing who'll be a part of our planning commission and moving forward to tackle all that the community development director has planned for us this year. Moving forward, we have the consent calendar. Item 1, approval of the planning commission meeting minutes of November 15th. Everybody have time to review?
Chair, can we do the consent all together?
Or we can do all together if you would not. All right, all together.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes as presented for both the 15th of November and the 6th of December, 2022.
I second.
I have a motion and a second. Roll call vote.
Commissioner Khrushchev?
Aye.
Commissioner Walker?
Aye.
Vice Chair Dixon?
Aye.
Chair Pahana?
Aye.
4-0 approved.
Thank you. Items removed for the consent calendar for discussion. We don't have any. We do not have any public hearings today. Anybody have items to be referred to City Council? Doesn't look like it's on the agenda. Discussion of potential action items, none. Let's get right into it with our Community Development Director updates.
All right, so there were 15 applications for the Planning Commission. I confirmed that this morning with the city clerk. I do not know the exact status of any potential interviews or appointments at this time, but I want to let you know that we had 15 applications in.
Thank you for your updates. We'll go on to our study session. Looks
Okay.
like we're going to turn it over for the downtown specific plan implementation. Say that 3 times fast.
That. Okay, so the downtown specific plan is very new for 29 Palms and was adopted in March of last year. Instead of saying the whole thing, 29 Palms Downtown Specific Plan Horizon 2045 Plan, I'm just going to say the downtown plan. It has established a land use plan, allowable uses, a development standards table, and design guidelines. But in comparison to other specific plans, including those that address downtown areas, the downtown plan is lacking in a few subject matters. One is a full set of allowable uses consistent in content and format with the other land use districts in the city. A full codification of the downtown code in the city's municipal code. We're missing a circulation chapter, an administrative implementation chapter, and a phasing financing chapter. The circulation chapter, as a bit of comparison, here is the city's circulation plan. What should be happening is we should have a focused circulation plan for the downtown area, identifying widths of streets and the hierarchies of streets. It's not in the specific plan. It does have some references to what could be happening in the future, but as far as what the development standards are, it's just not in there. Administrative implementation chapter and a phasing financing chapter. Just as a comparison, here are a couple of table of contents from other specific plans. Those areas highlighted in yellow are typical of specific plans that we are lacking. One, this happens to be the downtown Palm Springs specific plan. I know it's hard to read, but I just want to highlight that the administration and implementation, including phasing, financing, et cetera, are not in our downtown plan. And another example is happens to be another specific plan in unincorporated Riverside County, but it's the same story. Missing a vehicular section, implementation and financing section. As far as the allowable uses go, these are the list of allowable uses that are in the downtown plan. And by the way, I do have a copy of this online, so we can scroll through the specific plan if we like, or the development code, and also our GIS system. As we're going through this, we did notice that for one thing, we're gonna have to update this anyway because of the housing element, so we're gonna have to do some updates across the board for our development code anyhow, which we'll get into later. But we are finding some interesting things, like, for instance, not all allowable uses in the development code are listed here. So it's unclear if it's allowed, if something comes up with something that's typically allowed in the city, but it's not listed here, we're a little bit at a loss as to whether or not it's allowed. And we did find some interesting nuances. For instance, it calls for senior multifamily homes projects to be approved with a conditional use permit when any other multifamily development is just permitted by right. So we think there's some cleanup that needs to occur here in order to be more consistent with the development code and with state law. So the question that we have for the commission is, and there's some other things in the specific plan that we think need to be tweaked and changed. But those are the big ticket items. Will the commission request that each of these items be brought in all at once, or would you like to see one thing at a time? For instance, the circulation coming in first before the development standards. What's the commission's feel?
Maybe go through allowable uses, then circulation, then kind of see how that ties into what that means for admin and finance.
Yeah. I just have a few comments. I mean, it's like, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, there's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And here's my concerns, because I have one. One, I know that a circulation plan was discussed in all the working groups. Why it wasn't included in the development plan, and I don't know what's required by state law. I'm depending upon the expertise of both our staff and the consultants that we hired. So I don't know who failed to ensure that those things were done. As far as allowable uses, I know that's covered in the development code. If we want to repeat it in the downtown specific plan, we can. Is it? I mean, most people go directly to the development code.
Right.
I know I do.
Right.
If I want to see
and
what's
that-
allowable.
And that would be my suggestion, that we
But-
take to put the downtown zones in the development code in a similar
Right.
manner.
Okay, or refer to it, or, I'm just trying to find ways that we can do, and I would just like to, because I know this has now been approved by both this planning commission and the city council.
And I'm not
And-
looking for a rescission, I'm looking for the
Okay.
completion of it.
I'm all for, okay, what's the most important thing we gotta do first? If it's covered in the development code, if something is covered in the development code, we'll get to that, because there is a place for people to go to say, how is the use? hit the items that we need to have in here. If there's a circulation, excuse me, circulation plan that's required, we get the required elements that are missing is what I would suggest. And then go for readability as the next step. Those are my suggestions.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think we should start with the most important, what's most relevant, and then just go down from there. I think too much at one time is gonna kind of brain clog us, and then we might not get nothing done.
Brain clog you?
Well, I think what we're referring to is I hate to have to review a 450-page document over a weekend.
Yeah.
Understood.
Yeah.
Well, this is why we're having this discussion up front, to see how you want to do it. And one of the things that spurred this conversation was the Oasis Car Wash, which requested a reduced road improvement per the discussions that were had, but never got codified. So if that's the intent to codify that, then we need to codify it.
So is that more pressing? You want to do circulation first?
I'm looking for direction here. So we will definitely do some updates for the housing element, but we can bring circulation up first if you like.
Well, I think it's more of a case of why don't you yes, we would like to go one element at a time.
One at a time.
Mhm.
Okay. And you start off with what's the most important to meet
Urgent
state
from our-
law?
from
Yeah,
our- from
and then
our
move on
viewpoint.
from there. And you make that selection,
Okay.
is my suggestion.
I agree.
And I agree.
Okay. Okay, we'll begin the cleanup and we'll prioritize what needs to be done. And if it's one thing at a time, then you'll see this progressively throughout the year.
Perfect.
Okay, the second study session is two-story homes. And this is a request that some residents of Indian Cove made of the city council. Initially, it was a request to limit or prohibit two-story homes in the Indian Cove area. After a little bit of discussion that the city council had on January the 10th, just for some background, let me get to the conclusion here. This is the zoning area of generally Indian Cove. I did not put a defined boundary on here, but the different shades of yellow are the different residential zones, with public down here and commercial here. Most of this area is zone RS4, which is residential single family. And at the city council last week, I notified the city council, and I'm going to notify the planning commission too, that every single family zone in the city has a 35-foot height limit. And that is equivalent to 2.5, almost 3 stories potentially. If it's and to limit this to 1 story, you would be looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of an 18 to 20-foot height limit. The city council gave direction to city staff not to limit it just to the Indian Cove area, but to study this issue citywide. So, from a city staff, there's several different ways of doing this. To proceed here, one is to do some sort of zoning overlay, or that says certain areas or so close to the national park or something could be done to have a height limitation. You could invent a new zone for certain areas that people could say, I'm just gonna make it up, RS single family, single story, something like that. Or we could have design guidelines to address visibility and consistency in areas of a particular concern. So,
Or we
We're
can
ask-
leave,
or
or
we-
we can leave it at that 35.
or you can leave it at the 35. So we are asking for direction from the commission as to how to address the issue and what format a potential solution would take. And we did get 2 public correspondence.
Okay, thank you. So I did get a request to read 2 emails. As they came in, I'll just read them in that order. So bear with me. They requested to have these read aloud during this time. So I'm going to go ahead and read those. This is from Chuck and Heidi Hurd. And so this was sent on January 16th. As we are unable to attend the meeting in person, we would like to make comments on item number 4 of the agenda. Please include this in the record of the meeting. The recent two-story build in the Indian Cove have been an issue from the get-go. These two builds are also part of the intertwined web of LLCs that have built new houses. See Appeal VHR 22-195. That will go straight to VHRs. In fact, I just received a notification letter that VHR 22-192 last week. These two-story builds have been built so far back on the lots of the homes directly north of both of them have lost all our backyard views and at some times of the year even sunlight. Our homes to the west of the lot lost any chance of privacy in their yards because of the upper story and the balcony overlooking their yards. Had the two-story at 7050 Indian Code have been built with the north-south orientation further forward to the east of the lot, things may not have been as bad for the neighbors. But these builders, investors do not care for anyone but themselves. The two-story on the corner of Sullivan and Pine Springs is too large for that lot. Neither of these builds fit the characteristics of the neighborhood at all. But then they weren't built to the homes for families, but just two more additions to the unique boutique hotel chain. One of these builds is in the National Park buffer zone and the other is the right of the edge. It appears that the planning did not even take that into consideration when the building permits were submitted in the first place. Please consider implementing a maximum height of a future home structures in the Indian Cove neighborhood of approximately 15 feet and do not allow further construction of two-story buildings in the Indian Cove neighborhood. In addition, please consider putting a hold on issuing of the permit VHR 22-192 until such time that the council can review the ordinance. This build, along with the pending VHR 22-248, are part of the hotel chain as VHR 22-195. There are two other new builds at 6830 and 6840 Indian Cove Road, and I suspect are also part of the hotel chain. We are in a housing crisis, and having LLCs take over and put in their new builds go straight from ground up to VHR is not helping our city or its residents. An amendment to the building code is in order to prevent new builds from going directly to VHRs. An amendment is also needed to prevent any more two-story buildings in the Indian Cove neighborhood and other neighborhoods within the National Park buffer zone. We need to start taking care of our full-time residents of our cities, putting their well-being ahead of weekend tourists and outside entities such as Field Trip, Evoke, and Blue Sequoia. Thank you, Heidi and Chuck Hurt. All right, one more, okay? This is from Cindy Bernard on January 17th. To whom it may concern, please read the statement out loud and into the record. Dear members of the Planning Commission, the iconic rock formations of the Joshua Tree National Park are only visible from Highway 62 in the Indian Cove. Therefore, Indian Cove has a vista that's unique in the city and rare in the Rongo Basin. The view from the highway is crucial for tourism as it is for residents. That's why it's a scenic vista that's worth preserving by restricting the height of the new construction to a single story of about 15 feet. You may ask, what are the boundaries of Indian Cove? My grandfather bought property labeled Indian Cove Land for Sale in 1961 and built one of the early houses in the neighborhood where I live now. Historically, Indian Cove is understood to be the area immediately north of the Indian Cove campground. The easternmost house is the Lucky House in the Rattlesnake Canyon Wash, and westernmost street is probably Montoya or Kern. The other boundaries are Highway 62 and the north of the Joshua Tree National Park boundary on the south. It should also be noted that at the area south of Sullivan is Indian Cove, is the Joshua Tree National Park buffer zone, which is specified in the 2012 29 Palms General Plan. She quotes the plan. The intent of the Joshua Tree National Park buffer overlay is to protect, enhance, and expand the scenic vistas and resources adjacent to the national park by discouraging development that could potentially impact these resources, strongly discourage intensification of existing allowable development densities within the national park overlay, and development standards shall be established with the goal of preserving the scenic vistas and resources along the national park. Can the planning commission give direction to the planning department for review of any development in the buffer zone? How do construction of new two-story structures and very large STR move forward in this buffer zone without the planning department pulling both applications for special attention? Shouldn't any construction in the JTNP buffer zone be subject to CEQA review? Preserving scenic visits is one of the CEQA elements. We need to preserve what makes Indian Cove and 29 Palms unique, including its scenic vistas. I strongly advocate limiting structures in Indian Cove, if not the whole city, to one story approximately 15 feet in height. Sincerely, Cindy Bernard. Okay, so that was a lot. What do you guys have any comments from what Keith said?
Well, I'll start the ball rolling. First of all, I'm going to divide these into two things. VHRs are going to be handled differently because that's an entirely different regulation. We're talking about two-story buildings within 29 Palms and a height of 35? Yeah. My view is like, okay, that's been within our city regulations since like 1987 when we became a city and two-story homes were allowed. And I understand the feeling of the people in Desert Cove. I sit in a house and then somebody builds a building and it's 2 stories and it blocks my view, and that can be very frustrating. I got it. But I get concerned when a group sits there and wants to put a standard that's going to affect the entire city where this may not be an issue in the other parts of the city, having a 2-story building. I don't know. You'd have to tell me if is that normal to have a special zoning for a neighborhood?
It's not unheard of.
Okay. But would that something that would have to be like a referendum amongst all the people in that neighborhood
Well,
to agree to? Or do we sit there and just keep, we have the same, I see the same names, okay?
Yeah.
And I see a same vocal minority that wants to make changes, and they may have valid reasons in their view for making these changes, but before we take changes that affect the entire city, yeah, I think we have to take a hard look. You're asking for guidance, and I'm not sure what to tell you. Is like, see about special zoning requirements for a city, and what would it take to do that? Because there's a lot more than the 8 to 9 individuals and again, I understand, it gets frustrating. I have a house with a nice view, and then a two-story house goes up in front of me, and it's gone. I got it, And
Well,
so that would be my query is
yeah. So there's more, like I mentioned in my presentation, there's
Yeah.
more than one way of potentially addressing this issue. As I mentioned, most of the Indian Cove area is zoned RS4,
Yeah.
but there's also, all these other areas are also various degrees of RS,
yeah.
okay? Which is true for all of the rest of the city. And there are other 2-story homes. There's 2-story homes in this neighborhood here. And I haven't checked every single street, but there's, I think,
There's 2-story homes all throughout town, not just
Right.
Yeah.
the sprinkling of 1 or 2. There's plenty all throughout town.
yeah. So we could put in a design guideline that somehow, this is what the study session is for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could put in a design guideline that says thou shalt protect a view. You could invent a whole new zone. You could put in a zoning overlay.
What a zoning overlay? What is that exactly?
What you could, for instance, I'm just going to make this up for conversation purposes. Okay. What you could say is, for instance, anything south of Sullivan down here, and just draw a map somewhere and say anything within this overlay is limited to 18 feet or something like that. You could do that as a zoning overlay.
Okay.
So I understand having read those comments, like I understand their concerns. I feel for their concerns. SB 9, however, has decided passing that as state,
Mm-hmm.
that we cannot further restrictions for development. So it's to include the housing crisis of 2019 that was written, that Housing Crisis Act that says you cannot create limitations such as height. So if we want development and we want to meet our housing numbers, we cannot set the limit. So I would suggest that although we hear their concerns and we hear the reasons why, and although they could be valid, there's a superseding Senate bill that says we can't. So I would suggest, as the staff, we'd have to marry that up with what our lawyers say that we can do and move forward with the state law.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think we really need to check with our legal team on this.
That's a good point about SB 9. I didn't even think of that. That's exactly right, because we went to a conference where they went over the whole SB 9. And there were a lot of things that, multiple buildings, duplexes. If a place is zoned for single-family living, you can now put a duplex. And that duplex can have 2 auxiliary structures. So you can have up to 4 living structures inside what was zoned, and that's what state law says now.
Correct. And even coastal commissions or other, areas in California have been trying to, for lack of a better word, be clever with writing their documentation, but just because you're blocking the view of the ocean doesn't mean that you're going to get past that SB 9 requirement of, I want to put a 4-story building here that has historically never been allowed, but given that rule, they can move forward with these type of buildings. So perhaps you've lived a life of looking at the mountain, but somebody wants to build there and they don't have those, restrictions or requirements anymore. So, thank you, City Council, for having us kind of look into this, but it's something that even our team is going to need some more time to, ask the lawyers or just kind of look a little bit more into that. Like Krushat said, 35 feet has been the standard pretty much for a very long time. It's never been an issue, but I think SB 9 is going to probably trump a lot of what desires people want to have to minimize that height restriction anyways.
So that
Point
would be-
taken.
So could guidance be, we need to review SB 9 and see how it would affect any height restraints before we can move forward.
Fair enough. And
Okay.
what we'll do is we'll ask our city attorneys
Okay.
before we bring this back.
Okay.
Okay. And do you want me to go to the last one, or do you want me to call on me, or how do you want to do? And then the last study session is, we would like to do a lot of cleanup when we mentioned the downtown specific plan, which we're going to modify this calendar accordingly. But there's several other things in the development code that we think are not particularly clear, or we've made interpretations on that we want to codify. One thing that I really try to do when I write policy or I write ordinance or when I work on an ordinance, I always try to think of not me, whoever the end user is, whether it's a person wanting to know what's allowed in his zone, someone at the front counter, someone who works the front counter, a developer. And if it's not clear, it muddies everything up. And the fewer interpretations that we make, it's just the more clear everything is, the more transparent everything is.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a very preliminary schedule of events for going through the development code almost chapter by chapter and making clarifications, edifications, and just cleaning things up for everybody. And this does not include development applications. As of right now, we've got one development application in-house, but that's an accessory or an administrative use permit. So we don't have any pending development applications coming forth. So we thought this would be a good time to do a lot of this cleanup. So I'm not going to go through these one by one, but this is our preliminary schedule. There's some things in there that the development code says we have to do or should do, and when we get to that point, we'll even ask we'll come to the commission. It's like, is this something we really want to do? For instance, I believe there's even like design guidelines that are prescribed in the development code that we've never established for residential. Not really, We have some in certain areas, and like the downtown specific plan, but we've never established citywide design guidelines. So, as an example of something we may actually delete from the development code or just modify what the development code says. So, and each of these is chapter by chapter. So that's our homework for the year.
I like it.
So, and if there's anything that the commission has run across that says, wait a second, I thought something happened 2 years ago and we did it this way and I didn't understand it, maybe let us know and we'll see if we can get it cleaned up this year.
Okay.
Again, I'm not asking for a vote, this is more of an informational.
You guys like it? You guys up for the schedule?
I'm good with it. I have a question. Your predecessor's forte was getting grant money and going after grant money.
Mhm.
Do we have any plans on the horizon for getting more grant money?
I haven't been too forward thinking in that yet. I've been trying to
Okay.
get a lot of these things cleaned up.
Okay.
But there's different grants for different things.
Yes.
I can tell you that our engineering folks are always pursuing grants for street improvements and traffic improvements and that kind of thing. And,
Okay.
the whole sewer system is, a lot of it's on grants. And our Public Arts Advisory Council wants to go after a lot of public art grants.
Mhm.
So as far as housing grants and things like that, not yet.
Okay.
But that is something I'm well aware of that we should
Okay.
be pursuing when we
Okay.
can.
Okay. Do you guys have anything further?
Nope.
You have clear direction from us?
I believe I do.
Perfect. Okay. With that being said, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting.